Today we'll be discussing the case of Jacqueline "Jackie" Saburido. It's September 1999. Jackie is on her way home from a party she attended with friends. She had been in the States for almost a month by this point, enjoying life as an international student from Venezuela. Everything about this car ride was as normal as could be, until suddenly there was a loud boom, and soon enough, the car Jackie was in was lit with fire. Jackie and her friend's car had been hit head-on by an oncoming vehicle, and as she remained pinned and stuck inside the car, the fire slowly crept up until it ultimately reached her. 45 seconds straight of Jackie ablaze. There was absolutely nothing that could have been done to help her. Paramedics and the rescue team had never seen damage so bad for someone in a crash like this, and Jackie's condition was so critical, everyone, including doctors, thought there was no way she would make it. A missing nose, missing eyelids, several broken bones, and 60% of her body covered in third-degree burns later, Jackie survived this crash. But what was once a young, confident, and very cheerful woman was now someone whose body had been damaged so badly from this crash, she was left physically unrecognizable. Many would be stunned to learn just what Jackie would have to go through in order to survive this very tragic ordeal. And as she would campaign and become the face of the anti-drunken driving movement, her story would hit the entire world with a very scary reality that not everyone who gets hit by a drunk driver dies. The majority of the information from this case comes from an article written by David Hafetz, originally published in the Austin American-Statesman newspaper in 2002 called Chasing Hope. Hafetz followed the story of Jackie, her family, and the several others involved in this case. He also worked in collaboration with Rodolfo Gonzalez, who took the photos used in the article. I would highly recommend checking it out. The link for the story is in the description. But before we get into this case, just to introduce myself, my name is Petal Palmer, and on this channel I post anything medical, mysteries, and crime. If that is something that sounds interesting to you, please consider subscribing if you end up liking this video. Alright. Let's get into this case. Jacqueline "Jackie" Saburido Garcia was born on Wednesday, December 20th, 1978 in Caracas, Venezuela, to mother Rosalia Garcia and father Amadeo Saburido. She often went by her nickname Jackie, so I'll be referring to her as that in the video. She was described as being confident as a child and a perfectionist with a strong and joyous voice. She loved listening to merengue and Spanish ballads, and she loved singing. As the article said, she described, quote, "Life without music wouldn't be life, and the best way to live it is singing." She spent time watching stars from her father's boat. She would go swimming in the island beaches with her friends and family. She danced flamenco, and she would even have car races in Caracas. Her parents, Amadeo and Rosalia, were both born in a poor rural province of Spain called Galicia. And they were both brought to Venezuela by their parents when they were teens, as they were hoping to give them a better life. After settling in Caracas, when Amadeo was a teen, he started an electrical installation company with his friend, which was the first of many businesses he'd go on to start. And a few years later, he and his older brother bought an air conditioning factory called Climar, a company that would remain in the family for many years, including during when this case happened. When Amadeo was 21, he and Rosalia first met when their families introduced them to each other at the beach in 1974. Rosalia was 18 years old at the time and working at a hair salon. He had great manners and was very chivalrous, and he thought she was beautiful and liked her personality, despite thinking she had a difficult personality. Despite Amadeo feeling iffy on their wedding day, they had gotten married just the next year in 1975, and it wasn't too long after when things took a pretty bad turn. They would get into arguments a lot. According to the article, Rosalia described that she was explosive, whereas Amadeo just wouldn't talk. According to the article, quote, "She said Amadeo never respected her. She began missing the polite man who had courted her. Amadeo said he wanted a hardscrabble wife, a woman like his mother who worked the land as she raised her 5 children, but Rosalia wanted to stay at home." Amadeo further described, quote, "I managed every situation I faced in life, but not her. I don't know if she's unmanageable or I'm incapable." And once Rosalia became pregnant with Jackie, Amadeo began thinking of getting a divorce. When Jacqui was born and growing up, both of her parents absolutely loved and adored her. Jacqui and her mother did everything together, whether it be Rosalia using road signs to teach her how to read while Jacqui joined her on her errands, or even Jacqui watching Rosalia clean the house. Her mother taught her decorations were for decor and not for touching, and Jacqui got really into decorating as a child. When she was a child, her father was often putting in 14 and 16-hour days working at his factory in order to provide for the family, so she didn't see him as often. In fact, during that time, she called him by his first name. During the weekends, though, they would spend more time together, as Amadeo would bring the family to Venezuela's Caribbean coast. His parents taught him how to fend for himself, so he would do the same for Jacqui, teaching her how to fish and maintain the engine. But even on land, when she was little, he would have Jacqui sit on his lap and show her how to steer, and once she was big enough for her legs to reach the accelerator, he allowed her to drive as he held the emergency brake. With how much he worked, he was able to provide Jacqui with everything she asked for, whether it be a new car and even a jet ski. They described that Jacqui herself was very persistent if he refused a wish of hers, and she over time mastered the skill of being able to essentially convince others to get what she wanted. According to the article, one friend of hers even described, quote, "Say no to Jacqui? Impossible. It always costs you less to say yes." It was during Jacqui's teenage years when her parents' relationship was deteriorating. And with both she and her mother having a similar strong will, they too began clashing as well. Jacqui's friends at the time were often allowed to have guests over, throw birthday parties, and put on lipstick, and these were things Jacqui wanted to do at her and her family's apartment. But her mother wouldn't allow her to. At some point before or after Jacqui graduated high school, Amadeo ended up moving out. So after being married for 21 years and technically not being together for years prior to this, Amadeo and Rosalia officially separated that year in 1996. When he moved out, Jacqui stayed with Rosalia. But eventually, the article described that Jacqui said it got to a point where her mother didn't even want her touching anything. So at 17 years old, Jacqui ended up packing up her car with her clothes, stuffed animals, and the family's picture albums, and moved to her father's house, doing 5 trips with her items all by herself. The car she drove was a green Toyota Corolla her father bought her as a high school graduation gift, one that Rosalia actually objected to him buying. Amadeo was staying in a new penthouse, and along with her car, there was also Amadeo's plane and boat. When Jacqui got to the penthouse, she was extremely independent. She didn't want any help, and she would often do the cleaning, shopping, or ironing all by herself. Likewise, she would also help Amadeo out by helping hand wash his clothes and pack his luggage whenever traveling. Jacqui someday had plans to take over Climar, the air conditioning company that her father ran. But for the time being, the two absolutely loved each other and enjoyed living together. In fact, Amadeo, who Jacqui called the nickname Tito, said that those years he spent with Jacqui were the happiest years of his life. Despite the success she had in essentially most aspects of her life, whether it be intelligence, money, friends, around July of 1999, when she was 20 years old, Jacqui had unfortunately been facing a lot of anxiety. In college, she was studying industrial engineering to prepare her in taking over her father Amadeo's factory, but she had fallen behind in school. Whenever she would take tests, she would panic, she hyperfixated on any moments where she failed, and she was even debating if she should continue with school or drop out. Not just this, but years prior, Jacqui's parents introduced her to a man named Marcos Martinez while they were at the beach, and eventually they began dating, turning into her first serious relationship. Jacqui thought Marcos was the perfect guy for her as he was sweet, determined, and treated her well. But at some point, he actually ended up breaking up with her, and this breakup left Jacqui absolutely devastated. She began seeing a psychologist to help her with getting through this breakup, but even after 2 years had passed, she was still thinking of him often. Jacqui later described, quote, "My dream, the dream of my life, the most important thing since I was little was to find someone who truly loves me and who I love and have a family with. 4 or 5 children." And the article described that Jacqui always felt a little lonely when growing up, with her mother Rosalia saying, quote, "She had everything, but she wasn't happy either. She was lacking a family." While Jacqui always considered her mother as being the volatile one, it was during this time when Jacqui was more volatile and often getting into arguments with everyone. She stated, quote, "Every day I got worse. I cried, I got depressed, I didn't study, I wanted to close the door and forget everything." Whenever she needed an escape, she would go for a drive in the car her dad bought her. Likewise, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, she went to flamenco class. She began studying flamenco at 18 years old, and while she often had trouble concentrating in class, there would be times when she would return home and just felt the urge to practice. After months of feeling this way, it was in August of 1999 when Jacqui decided to take a break from college to study English abroad in Austin, Texas of the United States. While this would be a big move by herself, she fortunately had a family friend who lived in Texas who was able to help her with arrangements and such. Amadeo thought that this was good for Jacqui as she deserved a rest, but the article states that Rosalia had a very big premonition and pleaded for Jacqui to stay. Likewise, Jacqui even apparently told her very close older cousin, Yalitza, Yali Villar, that she knew something was going to happen to her. Yali told her not to go if she doesn't want to, but ultimately in the end, Jacqui felt she should go, and that was her final decision. A week before leaving, Jacqui went to their beach club to ride on her jet ski, and she remembers telling herself to enjoy it because she didn't know if she'd ever get another chance to. It was then on Friday, August 20th, 1999, when she left from the Caracas main airport to head to the States. Upon arriving in the States, Jacqui initially lived with a host family who spoke Spanish, but very soon after, at least within the first few weeks, she eventually moved into a solo apartment in a dorm. She was studying English at a private language school near the University of Texas in Austin, and she was happy being on her own. In fact, she even thought she might want to stay for another semester because of how much she enjoyed it. In her English class, she met a 20-year-old Venezuelan student named Joanna Gil. Joanna was her neighbor, and the pair soon became good friends and did everything together. So it was no surprise Jacqui asked Joanna if she wanted to go to a birthday party that was happening. On Saturday, September 18th, 1999, just a little under a month of Jacqui being in Texas, she called her dad on the phone to tell him there was a birthday party outside the city on Lake Travis that she wanted to go to. It was the birthday party of a guy who was also Venezuelan. Now, her father wasn't too much of a fan of the idea of her going to this party, especially as it was a bit far, being about at least a 30-minute drive away, but he told her this and he advised her to bring fare for a cab in case she were to get stranded. Joanna wasn't really feeling like going, but Jacqui was able to convince her until she agreed, and after getting ready, they both headed to the party. On the night of the party, there was a famous boxing match going on between Oscar de la Hoya and Felix Trinidad at the Mandalay Bay Event Center in Las Vegas. So while at the party there, Jacqui and her friends watched the match on TV. They then danced salsa and merengue, and this felt like it was a party back home in Venezuela. While there, Jacqui chatted with a 20-year-old student from Colombia named Laura Guerrero. Laura was there with her boyfriend, Johan Dahl, a 22-year-old from Venezuela. The couple met the previous year in 1998 after also coming to study in Austin. After hours passed, Jacqui felt like it was finally time to go home. However, the birthday boy who was the ride she came with had been drinking, so he was unable to drive them. And because of this, Jacqui and Joanna waited around until they could get a ride. There was an 18-year-old student from Russia there who went to the Austin Community College named Natalia Chipchek Bennett, and eventually she offered them a ride home. Jacqui herself rarely drank, and she had been observing Natalia, who also was sober, so they agreed to go with her. Natalia was driving a 1990 Oldsmobile 98 Regency. While Laura and Johan hopped in the back, Jacqui and Joanna were briefly arguing about who should ride in the passenger seat. Jacqui insisted Joanna should go, whereas Joanna insisted Jacqui should, until ultimately Jacqui gave in and just sat in the front. Natalia buckled her seatbelt and turned on the radio. Laura didn't buckle her seatbelt and fell asleep in Johan's arms, who too fell asleep, and Jacqui later didn't recall if she buckled her seatbelt or not. According to the article, throughout the ride, Joanna had been complaining that Natalia wasn't driving fast enough, with Jacqui even remembering her saying something like, quote, "We're never going to get there at this turtle's pace." But as she was saying that, the article says that Jacqui remembers turning around and thinking, "We're gonna crash." I'm not sure why she apparently thought that, but that's what the article states. At 4:22 a.m., just about a mile down the road, a 34-year-old paramedic named John McIntosh was just saying goodbyes to firefighters and a rescue helicopter crew after they had just collected a woman who had crashed her car into a telephone pole. John was a former U.S. Army medic, and as he drove the ambulance towards Austin, his partner, Brian Fitzpatrick, a 29-year-old career paramedic, was in the back attending to the patient. With the time it was, this should have been their last run for the night before switching shifts. He drove for about a mile on a dark stretch of a significant arterial road called Ranch to Market Road 2222, or RM 2222. This road was lined with cedar trees and a small amount of streetlights. But as he was just passing the research center for a company called 3M and rounded a gentle curve, he immediately slammed on the brakes because as he looked ahead, all he saw was a burst of yellowish orange flames going up in the sky. And as he looked below, 2 wrecked cars were stretched out across the eastbound lane in a V shape. John slowed down as he approached the wreckage, and one of the first things he saw was a young man in the middle of the road holding a cell phone and frantically waving his arms. This man was named Reggie Stephey, and he was absolutely stunned because Reggie was behind the wheel of one of the vehicles involved in the crash. The front of his car was wrecked, but the rest of the vehicle was essentially untouched. And fortunately, because of the airbag, Reggie himself also was fairly untouched. All he really had was a red seatbelt mark that the crash caused across his chest. The other vehicle, however, was engulfed in flames. And the driver was Natalia, who was in the car along with Jacqui and everyone else she had left the party with. Reginald Reggie Stephey was an 18-year-old who played as a wide receiver for the Lake Travis High School football team. He also played baseball and was on the path to going to college after graduating. When Reggie was a child, his father had passed away, which left him with $70,000 from an insurance policy. Using that money alongside pay from his job folding clothes at a store at the mall, he was able to move into his own apartment earlier that summer and support himself. Not just this, but he also was able to use the money to buy a blue 1996 GMC Yukon, a sport utility vehicle or SUV he got customized and raised. This was a recent purchase for him, and it was something he really took pride in. On that morning of Saturday, September 18th, after recently finishing his 3rd football game of the season, Reggie's mother had picked him up from football practice and had driven him to pick his car up from the car shop as Reggie was getting a new bumper. And once he was able to collect his car, later that night, he met up with some high school friends at a dock on Lake Travis where they drank beer from an ice chest. Reggie had about 2 or 3 drinks before his friends started leaving at around midnight. But instead of going home like they were, Reggie, visibly intoxicated, drove by himself downtown to a college party. So intoxicated, even when arriving at the party, someone later testified that his eyes were bloodshot. But even with this being the case, at the party, he just drank more and more to the point, when recounting this story later on, he said he couldn't remember how many beers he drank that night at the party. And just making matters worse, despite being intoxicated, Reggie hopped into his car, heading west on RM 2222 before climbing a steep hill firefighters referred to as Tumbleweed Hill, a 10% gradient hill that stretched for half a mile. It was just moments after this when he crashed into Natalia's moving vehicle. And it was soon after that when he got out of his car and called 911.
911.
Hey.
Yes.
I've got an emergency. I've got a car wreck. I believe it's on 620. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what road I'm on. It's a Yukon and a Blazer.
When he called 911, he couldn't remember what road he was on or anything. And after walking to the other car, he not only saw a small flame, but he had heard gurgling coming from the front seat. The front of Natalia's car was twisted and crumpled, described in the article, quote, like an accordion, and there was broken glass covered all over the road. By that point, both Natalia, who was crushed against the steering wheel in the front, and Laura, who was curled up in a ball in the back, had passed away, whereas Joanna and Johan in the back were dazed and injured, but alive. And Jacqui in the passenger seat too was alive, but struggled as she was stuck and tried to set herself free. Jacqui was stuck between the dashboard and the front seat, with her legs pinned under the dashboard. And as she struggled to break free, Flames were coming from the engine and were slowly moving their way across the dashboard up to her face. John, the paramedic, quickly stopped the ambulance, rolled down the window, and asked Reggie if anyone was in the vehicle. And Reggie told him, no, there's no one in the Yukon, my car, but there's a fire in the smaller car. At that point, John told Reggie, okay, wait across the road, before pulling past the wreck and radioing to his team that there was a car fire and that he thinks people are inside. He quickly turned on the emergency lights, headed to the rear doors of the ambulance, and yelled to his partner, Brian, that he thinks there's people inside. And as he was doing this, John yanked the fire extinguisher off of the wall to head to the car. Brian was someone who had actually trained other paramedics in water rescue, but as these flames were right in front of him, he had never been in a situation like this in his life. As paramedics, both he and John's training had been to treat people, not to pull people from burning cars. So this was new to them. But this was an emergent situation, and they knew that they had to act fast if they wanted to give whoever was still in that car a chance to live. As Brian headed on the radio, John ran to Reggie's car with the fire extinguisher to make sure it was empty before he headed to Natalia's. And once he got to the car, he aimed at the fire and squeezed the nozzle of the extinguisher. Once it was completely dark in the car, John let go of the nozzle. But after peeking through the white cloud in the car, he saw a small flame glowing. He very quickly looked into the car and immediately saw Joanna by the back right door with her forehead covered in blood and Johan in the center hump. They both were silent and just watched John trying to rescue them. This wasn't the first time John witnessed a very serious crash or emergency. He had seen similar situations while serving in the army and had even been in situations where nobody had medical gear to help save those involved. John grabbed the door handle of the rear driver's side, which fortunately opened easily without a sound. He then grabbed Johan, who mind you was 200 pounds, and pulled him backwards out of the car. And when John glanced back at the engine, he knew he had to hurry because he could just see the flames were back, moving again across the dashboard. His partner Brian was still at the ambulance working on the radio and calling the firefighters who were present at the first accident. And to everyone's fortune, they were still nearby as they had only just been pulling away from the scene. Not only were they heading to this new scene, but a Starflight helicopter was also called. And after spotting the fire, the crew radioed Brian, who told him they should find a place to land because they might need them. Once he confirmed help was on the way, Brian grabbed his fire protection coat and began running towards the burning car. And this all happened fast because this was during the moment John was dragging Johan across the road away from the car. It was then when Brian first learned that there were in fact people in the car, and he quickly ran to grab his medical gear. After getting Johan in a decent spot, John sprinted back to the car where Joanna was still staring at him, and he too pulled her and dragged her across the road along with Brian, who caught up and helped her. John quickly sprinted back to the car, yelling to Brian that there was more people, but as John was just thinking that he needed to hurry, the helicopter began landing, and as the smoke was being whipped everywhere by its blades, so much smoke from burning plastic was going up his nose, he got out of breath and literally began coughing out smoke. He tried pulling Laura off of the floorboard, but her feet were wedged under the front seat, and as he moved in closer to try untangling her, he just had a flash image of his wife and baby in his mind, as he worried he too could lose his life in this attempt and leave his son behind without a father. Fortunately though, as Laura's legs began to loosen, the paramedics were able to successfully pull out her limp body. Brian examined Laura as John hurried back to the car. Jacqui was still in there, and as the fire approached closer to her, she was screaming and crying for help and just squirming to free herself. John pressed the door handle, but the door wasn't opening at all. He then picked up the fire extinguisher off the ground and tried putting the fire out, but unfortunately, it was now empty, so nothing was coming out of it. As he threw the extinguisher back on the ground, Jacqui began screaming through the shattered window, but John couldn't make out what she was saying. So while panting, he was just telling her, "Look, I'm a paramedic, my name is John, I'm gonna get you out, I'm not gonna leave you like this." Using his bare hands, he began pulling the door, but the door was stuck. He then tried to yank the seat back from the flames, but the seat was jammed as well. As the flames moved closer and closer to Jacqui's face, she began pushing back and using her broken right arm to whip around and try to gain leverage. Meanwhile, John was tearing away at the door until he was finally able to bend the metal window frame just enough inches to let his fingers in. But even after doing that, the door still didn't move. And what everyone was trying to prevent from happening, unfortunately did. Jacqui rotated her face away from the flames, but she wasn't able to twist far enough. John watched as the flame reached and sparked Jacqui's hair. And as Brian yelled out that John needed to back up, John was pushed back by flames that shot out the window, ones that actually singed his arm hair and left scorch marks on his shirt. As he backed up, Jacqui was engulfed by the fire, and she began flailing and crying out in an agony the paramedics had never heard before. So bad, Brian began screaming himself, just yelling, "Oh my goodness, she's burning." All they could do was stand back, as there was nothing they could have done at that point to help, and it felt as if her screaming went on forever. Finally, after a few seconds, a tow truck actually pulled over, and Brian ran towards it, yelling that he needed their fire extinguisher. Once he grabbed it, he ran back to the burning car and tried using it. However, nothing came out. And when he looked down at the dial again, this one was also empty, so he dropped it on the floor. It was just moments after this when a fire truck crested the hill, so Brian ran over, frantically waving them down. As one of the firefighters was pulling off a hose and another began pumping water, the firefighter could just hear Jacqui screaming. Brian also yanked a second hose loose and helped with unwinding it, and John grabbed a pry bar off the truck, which he used to tear away at the burning door. With this, he was able to bend the window frame and break the door handle, and finally, in an act of desperation, he swung the metal bar against the door. While this all was happening, Jacqui was screaming, but suddenly, she was no longer wailing, and she was slumped over in the flames with her head drooping on her right arm. And to many who were there, they thought this was the moment she had passed away. In fact, Brian was relieved to think that she had passed and was finally out of her misery. One of the firefighters began flooding the car with water, while another began using a second hose on the car, and it took just a few seconds for the flames to finally be put out. Jacqui's body still had glowing bright red spots, and so a firefighter gently poured some water on her, but her body was so hot it steamed when this happened, and black sooty water splashed on John, who was still standing by the car. As he thought Jacqui had passed, John thought to himself that he needed to go tend to those who did make it out alive, so he headed past Brian, telling them that the girl in the passenger seat had passed away. When John felt and examined Laura, her body was lifeless and she had no vital signs, so he shouted to Brian that she was DOS, meaning dead on scene. When Brian peeked into Natalia's car, he could just see that every single nook and cranny of the car was burnt, and the seats were all melted into a thick, slimy substance. He then reached for Jacqui's wrist to formally check her pulse. It was at that moment when suddenly John just heard Brian yell from across the road, "Oh my God, she's still alive."
When Jacqui was engulfed by the flames, she was screaming and moaning and wailing an almost inhuman sound I've never heard another person make. She continued to scream as the flames kept growing. I remember thinking at one point as well, God, just please take her and let her stop suffering. When I pulled Jacqui out of the vehicle, parts of her were still stuck to the seat, and I was surprised to find when I walked up to the passenger side that she was moving and still moaning.
Jacqui was so badly burned to the point her face was not distinguishable and even her shirt melted. But even in that moment, she moved her head and began to whimper. Soon enough, a swarm of lights and sirens began approaching as several fire trucks, rescue workers, and police arrived on scene and sprinted toward the car. The firefighters tugged on the front seat to pull Jacqui off the dashboard. As they were doing this, a park ranger named Al Reyes turned a flashlight toward Jacqui and asked if she wanted to speak Spanish. Jacqui responded that she wanted to die speaking English. Then she asked about the other girls and further asked if she was gonna die. In his head, Al thought that there was no chance she would survive through this, but he didn't tell her this. He just assured her that while she was badly hurt, they were going to do the best they could to help her. Firefighters used a hydraulic claw called Jaws of Life, a tool that works like a reverse set of pliers, to pry open the door. They then wrapped gauze bandages on Jacqui's burns and tried lifting her up to get her out of the car. However, she was literally stuck to the seat, so they instead had to peel her off. As this was happening, there was literally loose skin sliding off, and Jacqui was crying in pain. A firefighter held her hand while they were doing this, and it appeared that she was slipping in and out of consciousness. They then wrapped her in a paper burn sheet, got her strapped to a backboard, and ran with her on the board over to the helicopter for the Starflight waiting for them. Whilst this was happening, Reggie was still on the phone with the 911 operator, a woman named Linda Garza. Linda was reading the information on the victims being posted on her computer screen in real time, seeing that the two had passed away and that one was trapped in a burning car, all the while speaking with Reggie, getting information on what happened.
I love that call. That's very selfish right now.
It's okay, Reggie. It's okay.
That was my baby. I worked so hard. I did everything to that car. Is everyone okay? Do you know?
That's fine, Reggie. I understand how you feel. You know,
I don't care about my car. Is everyone involved in the accident okay?
I don't know. They haven't told me anything yet.
Oh my God.
What's the matter, Reggie?
It doesn't look like any people are seriously injured, sir. Correct, sir? God. He won't answer me, but it doesn't look good.
Okay.
People look pretty bad.
Okay. Okay. I hear you, Reggie.
You right?
I hear you.
Okay.
It was just an accident, okay? Okay?
I could have done something. I didn't need to swerve out of the way.
Well, it could have been
They would have
worse.
compensated back.
Reggie, it could have been worse if you hadn't have swerved. Do you know what I'm saying? It could have been worse.
It could have been completely avoided.
At some point, Reggie asked Linda if he was going to be okay, and when she said he'll be fine, he said he hopes he didn't hurt anyone. At another point during the conversation, he also mentioned that he loved his car. Likewise, he also blamed the crash on the other driver, Natalia, who he claimed had crossed the median. While still on the phone with Linda, he was placed in the back of a police car. After this happened, he said that he needed to go home and asked when he could go home. He then asked Linda if he'd be able to lie down, and he subsequently closed his eyes and fell asleep. Linda estimated that the call lasted for about 80 minutes, which was the longest call she had in her career. The helicopter lifted off at 4:51 a.m. It was a short flight, but Jacqui rightfully screamed throughout, and the sound of the helicopter is something that later on she couldn't forget. They first brought her to Brackenridge Hospital in Austin, where she was briefly treated, given morphine, and placed on a ventilator. And as she slept, she had a dream of her father flying to come rescue her. They then brought her while sedated and immobilized to the blocker burn unit at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston. This burn unit is a nationally recognized intensive care unit, or ICU. It was an 8-bed unit on the second floor of the hospital, where nurses kept the unit at a temperature of 84 degrees Fahrenheit or 29 degrees Celsius for patients whose damaged skin no longer retained heat. Once she got there, the medical team worked tirelessly to treat her, as Jacqui was in extreme critical condition. The majority of her burns were third-degree burns, but the article mentions that not only had the burns reached the deep layers of her skin, but in some parts, they'd also reached down to her bone as well, indicating she had some burns of the 4th degree, which is the deepest and most severe kind. Overall, 60% of her body was covered in third-degree burns. The parts of her body that were in particular damaged the most were her face and hands, whereas her lower body, including her buttocks, one thigh, parts of her back, and below the knees, didn't face much damage at all. Then to add to this, she suffered several broken bones, including a fractured arm, leg, and hand, and unlike what healthy skin should typically be able to do, her skin was unable to hold fluids in and keep bacteria out. The nurses quickly hooked Jacqui up to an IV to get her fluids and antibiotics. She had so much body fluid coming out from the wounds, the fluid kept soaking the bed, and they constantly needed to treat her wounds by cleaning them and changing dressings. Because she wasn't able to retain heat, her room was kept to nearly 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 38 degrees Celsius. And every time the nurses would leave the room, they would literally be drenched in sweat. Jacqui continued going through it as her body was in a state of shock. She was at risk of organ failure, her blood circulation was limited due to swelling, her overwhelmed body began consuming itself for fuel, and she was given a feeding tube through her nose to be fed a high-calorie and high-protein solution for this. She was also given as much morphine and sedatives as safely possible, with one nurse describing that she was medicated, quote, to the gills. Reggie was taken to the hospital where he was checked out, and everything was all fine. But after checking his blood alcohol, lo and behold, it was very clear that Reggie had been drinking and was under the influence. He was subsequently arrested by police officers and brought to jail. And even almost 3 hours after the crash, Reggie's blood alcohol level was standing at a whopping 0.13. Mind you, the legal limit for driving is 0.08, on top of the fact that the legal drinking age in Texas was 21. Reggie was 18 years old, so he wasn't even at the legal drinking age, period. And just adding to that, less than 3 weeks prior, on Wednesday, September 1st, 1999, Texas had just adopted a new law lowering the blood alcohol concentration for drivers from 0.1 to 0.08. So Reggie was even above the old limit they had. Days after the incident, paramedic rescuers John and Brian met for beers and discussed the whole situation to try piecing everything together. They estimated that from the time they first noticed the fire to the time it was put out, this was probably about 8 minutes. They both agreed that Jacqui had intensely burned for a total of about 45 seconds, and they both certainly agreed that neither of them thought she would live. Rachel Goodhart, a 45-year-old nurse who was from Buffalo, New York, but had worked in the burn unit in Galveston for 10 years by that point, said she had never seen anyone survive such severe burns to the head, and she constantly prayed for Jacqui throughout this time. During the beginning of her stay, Jacqui was going in and out of consciousness, and ultimately later on, she didn't remember anything that happened. Back in Caracas, Venezuela, on the morning of the accident, the article says that Jacqui's mother, Rosalia, said that she actually had trouble sleeping as she was feeling very anxious about Jacqui. She apparently even called her sister-in-law, telling her that she felt something had happened. Then, Jacqui's father had gone out for a walk that morning, and when he returned in the early afternoon, he was met with frantic messages on his answering machine sent by the family friend who helped arrange Jacqui's stay in Texas. She had been calling all morning, and when Amadeo finally got in contact with her, she told him that Jacqui had been in an accident and things were not looking good. Amadeo called Rosalia to tell her this, and they subsequently booked a flight for both of them to leave from the Caracas airport that afternoon. As Rosalia threw her clothes in a bag and asked her brother to take out the garbage, she said that her mind wasn't accepting that this accident happened, and Amadeo was thinking and rather hoping that maybe the accident wasn't too serious before he rushed to the airport with his younger brother. Many hours later, it was at about 12 p.m. the following day when her parents arrived at the burn unit. But before seeing Jacqui, a doctor warned them that they weren't going to recognize their daughter. Amadeo put on a yellow gown, surgical mask, and gloves before entering Jacqui's room, and the first thing he saw was that she was wrapped in gauze with just her face and toes exposed. She was attached to a bunch of tubes and wires. Her arms were swollen to the same size of her legs, and her head had swollen to the size of a soccer ball, which blurred her features. Her skin looked leathery and charred, and she had burnt hair stuck to her head, which resembled bits of charcoal. And after getting a proper look at her, he later on described, quote, "Her face didn't exist. There wasn't a single part of her where I could say, that's Jacqui. No, nothing except her feet." Amadeo listened to Jacqui's breathing on the ventilator and just assured her that he was there and that she was going to be okay. He stayed for as long as he could, but it eventually got to a point where he was overwhelmed with emotion, describing, quote, "Never in my life had I known what it was to cry like I did on that day. From then on, I cried in silence. I cried sleeping. I cried awake. I believe I was crying all the time." Rosalia was waiting outside to see Jacqui, and when Amadeo exited the room, he warned her to brace herself because it was a truly heartbreaking sight. Nurse Rachel regularly spoke with burn patients and families, and she typically tried to not show her emotions, but with Jacqui's case, she felt particularly emotional. She had a daughter around the same age and couldn't imagine how Rosalia would feel seeing her own daughter like that. Nurse Rachel brought Rosalia over to the room. When Rosalia saw Jacqui, like Amadeo, she also let her know that she's there and that everything will be okay. But get this, while she was speaking, Jacqui actually moved her foot. And also similar to Amadeo, when Rosalia left the room, she collapsed on the floor of the hall and just cried. And even Nurse Rachel moved out of sight and began crying as well. The following day, doctors set Jacqui's fractured bones by drilling in pins, metal rods, and plates. They also cut her hands open and used a hard water spray to wash out any dead tissue and dirt. Then a couple days later, on Wednesday, September 22nd, surgeons began a process called debridement, where they used scissors and a long blade to slice through dead skin to reach flesh that was alive and able to bleed. To cover her burns, they used autografts, which are strips of healthy skin they shaved from the parts of her body that didn't get burned, and they were able to stretch these grafts to cover a wider area by using a machine to punch small holes in the skin. On the flip side, these grafts left Jacqui with more painful wounds in the parts of the body they used. So the doctors had to wait for those wounds to heal before they harvested more skin. In the meantime, as they healed, the doctors used homografts, which are samples of skin, but instead of it coming from Jacqui's body, it came from cadavers, and they used it as a temporary dressing method before the body would reject it and it would need to be replaced. The surgeons delayed debriding Jacqui's head as they had hopes to salvage as much of her face as they could. One thing they did, however, do was sew her eyes shut because fortunately, her eyeballs survived, but her eyelids were destroyed. So in order to keep her eyeballs from drying out, which could have caused her to lose her vision, they needed to keep it covered. A 30-year-old ophthalmology resident named Dr. Dwayne Roberts watched one of the early surgeries Jacqui had done. He had never seen such a severe case, and he also thought there was no way they could save Jacqui.
When I saw Jacqui, she was charred beyond recognition. The eyes were totally exposed. The eyelids were essentially missing. I did not expect her to survive.
Dr. Roberts eventually grew to become attached to Jacqui. He scheduled his shifts around her operations, and he would visit her every day before going home to chat with her. Likewise, because he also studied Spanish in high school, he even attempted to translate for Amadeo and Rosalia to help them better understand what all was going on with Jacqui. They both appreciated this. In fact, one day, Rosalia gave Dr. Roberts a long hug and they both began to cry. Jacqui was getting surgeries left and right with different doctors working on different body parts, and her parents were there the entire time with her dad sleeping in a chair beside her and her mom continually praying for her. Her dad would even sleep in 15 to 30-minute intervals every night, staying awake so he could be there if she needed anything. And he continued this throughout her stay, just finding time throughout the day to take naps later. Eventually, the parents rented their own separate apartments, and while they didn't speak much with one another, they both spoke to Jacqui. Despite her inability to respond at first, after a few days had gone by, Jacqui was able to sometimes respond to questions. She would move her foot up to say yes, and to say no, she would sway her foot from side to side. The parents wanted to touch her, especially as Nurse Rachel said how touch is healing, but with how badly her body was damaged, they didn't know where they could. Fortunately, though, after some time had gone by, one day, nurses told the parents that they should take off their gloves and massage her feet, which was an area of her body that was essentially not damaged. And with this, Rosalia was finally able to give Jacqui a kiss on her feet. As time went on, Jacqui's lips came off, then her right ear did, and she suffered many infections and high fevers. Not just this, but her fingers continued getting thinner, and at some point early on, obviously unbeknownst to Jacqui, doctors had to amputate parts of her fingers, leaving just as much as possible with the hopes that at least some bone would survive.
Her nose and her lips and her ears literally fell off in my hands.
In good news, on Sunday, October 10th, 3 weeks after the crash, doctors decided that Jacqui could finally breathe on her own. And though she wasn't able to speak that well immediately after being taken off ventilation, she was able to hoarsely whisper to her mother, "Hello." Regarding her eyes, however, as the skin on Jacqui's face scarred and contracted, the sutures that were holding her eyes closed kept on popping open. Then sometime in early October, they discovered that Jacqui's right cornea, which is the clear outermost part of the eye, had dried out and tore. And this required Dr. Roberts and the ophthalmology team to perform an emergency surgery. Then, it wasn't too long after that when the left cornea had deteriorated in early November. And this required doctors to rush to do a transplant, doing other operations to buy time for the more serious ones. Through these operations, she was unable to see and move. While she didn't remember much from her stay in the burn unit, Jacqui did vividly remember her hallucinations. Particularly, there was one where she imagined there were horses ripping off her skin as they rode over her. She imagined the hospital staff wanted to take her parents' life, and in some of the hallucinations, they actually did take her father's life just to revive him and then take it again. And with this, whenever he left her room, she wanted the door locked. And she even had dreams where she was trapped in a burning house. Not just this, but sometimes when she was lying down in bed, she would actually try blowing out flames that weren't there. According to the article, in her medical records, the staff at the hospital recorded her saying things like, quote, "Where are the other girls? Look at that car driving crazily," and "Sir, help me get my seatbelt off." While in the hospital, Jacqui would just ask everyone and anyone, including her parents, doctors, nurses, and visitors, what she looked like, and people would just answer that she looked better than last time, so as to not stress her out further. Her father, little by little, would describe things like she had her eyes sewn shut, and so on and so forth. But the article says that the morphine she was on would make her forget asking and forget his answer, so just days later, she would ask again. She even asked her mother if she was pretty or ugly, and her mom just had to tell her she didn't look how she used to, but that the care team was working to help her recover little by little. As part of treatment for Jacqui, as well as other burn patients, they had to make daily stops in what was called the tub room, which for most, if not all, was a very miserable time. What happened was the patients would be brought to a large stainless steel tub, and after getting the bandages removed by nurses, they would be lowered into a bath containing warm water and a gentle cleansing solution. And if not that, they would be instead placed on a stainless steel bed where nurses cleaned their wounds with mild soap. And this wasn't done just for a few minutes. This bath was a process that could last for up to 3 hours long. Before heading to the bath, patients would be given morphine, and while in the bath, they would have loud music playing to distract them. Nonetheless, no matter what distraction they tried, it was still a very painful process, and their reactions of loud screaming to the point of their families hearing in the hallway reflected that. There were times Jacqui even begged to skip her baths, but music was the only thing that could at least help her get through them. Specifically, nurses remembered that she would sing the full lyrics in English to "Oh Pretty Woman" by Roy Orbison. Over time, the medical staff began lowering Jacqui's dose of morphine, and at the same time, therapists were trying to push for her to get up and walk, because for all those months, she had been lying still in bed for the entire day. And with this, her body had gotten so weak from muscles wasting away that she couldn't support herself and couldn't balance herself well. Even the act of sitting up made her feel very ill because her entire body was weakened and in pain. Some of the work the therapist would do to help was they would get her belted to a board, and then in small increments, they would raise her up, which was helpful because if they weren't there supporting her, she would just fall right over. Just adding to this, she still was unable to see. So when she did get to the point of getting up to walk, she would take very small steps. Doing this was a very strenuous task for her. In fact, it would only take her about 5 feet of walking before she was completely exhausted. The therapist would manually move Jacqui's joints and stretch her skin, but this was a hard task even for them because her body would start contracting in an attempt to shrink its wounds. Even her left elbow was locked in place, and it got to a point where doctors ended up performing an operation to free her neck because every time her skin would contract, it would literally pull her chin down toward her chest. All of this was just such a miserable time for her. Every time she woke up, she would cry. Whenever she would go to sleep, she would cry. And Dr. Roberts said she would have brief moments where she would say, I don't want to do this anymore, like I'm done. Nonetheless, one thing all the medical staff said about her, including Nurse Rachel, was that she persevered through it all. On Monday, December 20th, 1999, Jacqui celebrated her 21st birthday in the burn unit, which she spent playing with her father. By then in December, Jacqui was actually showing a lot of her personality. She was playing pranks on people by doing things like jerking in mock pain and even using her toe to trip the oxygen level monitor, which would cause the nurses to rush in. She would even do some things like asking the medical team to come in close to her, then just shouting out boo. Jacqui's high spirit and the dedication her parents had made them favorites for the staff in the burn unit. On days where she was feeling more down, the nurses did what they could do to bring her energy up. Even one day when she was too tired to walk to the tub room, they began humming the song La Cucaracha, and the nurses alongside Jacqui's parents made a Congo line around her until she eventually joined as they headed down the hall. As Jacqui did her physical therapy, she mainly leaned on her father as she worried that her mother wouldn't be strong enough to support her. Her father stayed with her during the day, feeding her, cleaning her eyes, brushing her teeth, and helping in the bathroom. He kept track of the medications and treatments they were giving her to make sure nurses didn't forget anything. He also would lay out the supplies that Dr. Roberts needed for his daily check on Jacqui's eyes, whether it be bandages, utensils, eye drops, and even leeches. Because in January, they actually began using leeches as a treatment method to suck up blood that was pooling over a flap plastic surgeons placed in front of her left eye, using a muscle from her temple. With this, they also hoped that using the leeches would give more time for her veins to grow. Amadeo volunteered to tend to the leeches, so for 5 days, he would sit up using pincers to pluck the leeches off when they swelled with blood. Nurse Rachel said she had never seen such dedication from a father before. Unfortunately, though, after those 5 days, the eye flap died and her eye was back to being exposed until they sewed it shut again. Her eyes weren't the only concern, because around this time, Jacqui also began expressing worry to her parents that she couldn't feel her fingers. Because if you remember, they had to amputate parts of her finger as it was thinning away. She would sometimes feel phantom movements in her fingers, but for the times she couldn't feel her fingers, with her eyes being sewn shut, she was unable to see that her fingers weren't there. By the end of January 2000, the medical team met with her parents to discuss how they would try breaking the news to her. By that point, they were gearing up for her to be discharged pretty soon. And with that coming up, it meant they were going to be unsewing her eyes soon, which would ultimately allow her to see that her fingers were missing. So Amadeo had asked his cousin, who was a doctor from Venezuela, to come down to the hospital in Galveston to speak with Jacqui's doctors. And it was after that when his cousin broke the news to her. Eventually, Jacqui got to the point of reflecting on everything that had happened, and the question of why was something she repeatedly asked herself. Why did this happen to me? Why did this happen to my friends? Why did this happen at all? So on and so forth. She had begun seeing a psychologist at some point to help get through this and work out her thoughts. But Jacqui kept on searching for a meaning and felt there had to be a reason for this. While she couldn't fully see yet, it was only when her 5-month hospital stay was coming to an end when Jacqui began to somewhat see shadows, which later on she said she was glad for, as she stated, quote, "If I had seen myself as I was, I couldn't have continued." She was released from the hospital in February of 2000. When she looked in the mirror for the first time, it was blurry. But the following month in March, Dr. Roberts gave her some drops that dilated her right pupil, and this actually allowed her to make out details for a few hours. When Jacqui got back to her apartment, she grabbed 2 framed pictures of herself, sat on the edge of her bed, and began examining them. Then, after setting them down on her night table, she headed to her bathroom. And for the first time, she took a peek in the mirror. Growing up, Jacqui was 5 foot 4 inches, slender, had brown hair, and had brown eyes. Before the crash, she looked her age, like a 20-year-old. Now, though, it was hard to tell her age from her new face as she looked older. In place of where her right ear was, there was a slender crescent-shaped piece of cartilage surrounding a pea-sized black hole. On the left side, there was just a hole. She had torn nostrils, her right eye was scarred, and her eyes were not covered by eyelids whatsoever. She leaned in close and just began inspecting her entire face and feeling around. And her uncle, Antonio Saburido, remembered her saying in Spanish, "Who I was and who I am now," before beginning to cry.
When I really saw it the first time, I felt like a monster, like an alien.
Her uncle Antonio was there taking care of Jacqui while Amadeo was away, and after she looked at herself in the mirror, he sat with her on her bed and consoled her as she cried for hours straight. Like it had done before in the hospital, eventually she turned on some music and she began dancing, which helped cheer her up. Another patient, a 40-year-old named Felix Rodriguez, who attended the same physical therapy as Jacqui after she was released from the burn unit, thought it was so wild to see Jacqui getting up to dance cha-cha while her therapists were singing. He too had been involved in a car wreck which left him with 45% of his body covered in third-degree burns and caused him to lose one eye, his ears, nose, and parts of his finger. At the time, he was still being assisted with a wheelchair, and so he was in awe to see Jacqui dancing or even using the exercise bike, and this helped him continue going himself. Her old nurses had even requested that she come back to the hospital to speak with patients, and Jacqui agreed to doing this. This helped her feel like she had a purpose and wasn't just sitting around doing nothing, and she touched many patients, including a woman in her mid-30s named Sandra Silva, who was getting skin grafts in the hospital after her leg developed a flesh-eating infection. Jacqui's advice for her was to, quote, "Every day plan to cry 5 minutes, then move on," which stuck with Sandra.
Well, Jacqui says she allows herself to cry for only about 5 minutes a day. Mm-hmm. Right. So you let yourself feel sorry for yourself 5 minutes a day?
Really, it was my cousin idea. She said, "You only will have 5 minutes a day to cry." Mm-hmm. And then I tell, "Oh, yeah, I know, because, Okay, that's it. 5 minutes, finish.
Throughout the entire year, Jacqui's life consisted of physical therapy, psychologist and doctor's appointments, and several surgeries. She would often sleep late and wake up just to head to another appointment or operation. And she had a regular routine they called la rutina, meaning the routine, where she would have people bathing her, feeding her, cleaning her, and even applying hot wax to her neck and massaging the scars covering her body from her face down to her knees. Her skin felt hot and tight, described in the article as feeling as though she had a sunburn. And with it being burned, her skin wasn't able to produce sweat or regulate temperature properly in the heat or cold. So they had to properly care for it, with her uncle describing it being as if they were caring for a porcelain doll. The surgeons in the burn unit were able to successfully create an eyelid to cover her right eye, but they weren't able to do this for her left. So she just had to leave her left eye to float freely in the socket until a surgeon was able to create an eyelid for it. To reduce scarring, at home, she wore a pressure suit throughout the day and night, and at nighttime, she wore a face mask. And because her left eye wasn't covered with an eyelid, she was also required to regularly use eye drops. Her father would help put the eye drops in, put a goggle over her eye, moisturize her face, put her white silicone rubber mask to help smooth her scars, put a gold lycra hood on to keep the mask still and keep pressure on her. Then he would wrap a collar around her neck. He set an alarm for every 2 hours at 2 a.m., 4 a.m., and 6 a.m. to put another round of eye drops in Jacqui's eyes. She actually used to be a stomach sleeper, but she no longer did anymore as she worried she could scratch her left eye against her pillow. Still though, over time, Jacqui began seeing more and more out of her right eye, and she also began walking more. And it was by July of 2000, 10 months after the crash, when Jacqui finally felt fully conscious again. Still, she struggled mentally to accept that this happened to her. After several more months of the repetitive routine taking a huge mental toll on her, in mid-December of 2000, Jacqui decided to visit home in Caracas, Venezuela, with her stating, quote, "I told myself if I stay here, I'm going to die, not of sickness, but of depression." Wearing a wig, prosthetic ears, prosthetic nose, and a Santa Claus hat, she and her father landed at the Simón Bolívar International Airport, where they were greeted by family, including her mother, who returned to Caracas just a few days before Jacqui and her father. Jacqui worried about whether her friends would accept her after they saw her. While her friends weren't able to recognize her, Her closest girlfriend from high school, Marvin, thought that Jacqui's outline seemed familiar, and after she and Jacqui hugged, Marvin expressed that she loved her. Jacqui's loved ones circled around her, and with her low vision, she wasn't able to see the shock on their faces or that they were struggling to not cry. Jacqui stayed for 3 weeks, and through the entirety of this stay, she was able to recognize people by their voice. She even cried with one friend who openly cried when they met with each other. During her stay, there were several people who had extreme reactions to her. Some friends became physically ill when they first saw her, a few fainted, her little cousin ran away from her while crying, and Sharon Rangel, a close high school friend of hers who was studying medicine, actually vomited and spent an entire day in bed. I'm not sure if she vomited in front of Jacqui or if she did afterwards, but it just says she vomited. Even at the airport, Jacqui's cousin, Amadeo's nephew, walked away while repeating, "This isn't my cousin, this isn't my cousin." Jacqui's loved ones surprised her with her old car, her green Toyota Corolla, but she decided to ride home in Marvin's boyfriend's car, which was a tall Jeep. And when she refused assistance to get in her seat, one friend said that that's when they knew it was Jacqui. Her loved ones decorated the penthouse with lights and a large banner in both English and Spanish reading, "Welcome to your home." Jacqui, however, felt strange because as she sat in her old room, needing help to unpack her suitcase, she felt like this wasn't her house, as she felt like a completely different person. When Marvin went home, she cried, asking the same questions of why this would happen and if Jacqui will ever get married or have a family, as this was something they both would daydream for themselves together. But nonetheless, Marvin vowed to stick by her friend's side until the end. The next day, she visited Jacqui at her house, and many other friends, including Sharon and Jacqui's cousin Yeli, came over too. Jacqui consoled some of them as they cried, whereas a few people never visited at all. Marvin's parents described the reasoning for this being that they didn't have the courage and wanted to remember Jacqui as she was the last time they saw her. At first, Jacqui wore the wig and prosthetic ears and nose around her loved ones as she wanted to try making things more comfortable for them. But the prosthetics were starting to feel heavy and stuffy, so her friends just told her, "Look, we're all your friends, you can just take it off." Her cousin Yeli helped her take off her wig, and Jacqui took off her ear. She did leave the nose on, though, until the next day when she took it off. Jacqui was hoping to see her old boyfriend, Marcos. She had actually called Marcos after the crash with hopes they might be able to reconcile. Her 22nd birthday was on Wednesday, December 20th, 2000, and Marcos came over for her happy face themed birthday party Yeli put together. It was a bit too busy for the pair to chat at first, but when Marcos initially saw her, he nearly fainted, and as he was trying to picture how she used to look, he ended up walking into the kitchen and started crying. Before leaving, Marcos found Jacqui to speak with her, and he told her how much he admired her for her strength. Jacqui was hurt to eventually find out that he cried in the kitchen, and she later told a friend that she didn't want him to have pity for her. Though her birthday was a happy moment, there was still an overall sense of sadness associated with it. While everyone sang happy birthday, Jacqui and Amadeo cried, and later on, Amadeo just sat alone on the balcony. Though she wanted to stay home in Venezuela, it started getting to her seeing her friends do things that she wasn't able to do anymore, whether it be having careers, getting married, and starting families. She even told her friend from college that her life was ruined, but her friend just tried encouraging her that those things everyone else was doing are still possible for her. Jacqui, for the most part, seemed the same to her friends. She talked a lot, she made jokes, and many mentioned that she stayed the center of attention, which is something she had always been. The article mentioned that some might have seen her humor as a shield for how she was truly feeling, but nonetheless, her friends saw that she had a new maturity and perspective, and she often prayed and thanked God for giving her a second chance. Jacqui and her father returned to the USA the next month in January of 2001, and after getting back to their normal routine, it was just 5 months later when they had something very big to attend to. Jacqui showed up in court to testify against Reggie Stephey, the man who had crashed into the car she, along with her 4 other peers, were in. Reggie Stephey's trial began in June of 2001 at the Travis County Courthouse in Austin, Texas. In court was Mauricio Guerrero, the father of Laura Guerrero, who had passed away in the crash, as well as Johan Dahl, who had survived the crash and was the boyfriend of Laura. Reggie told both of them he was sorry. In the second week of the trial, Jacqui and Amadeo drove the about 3.5-hour drive to Austin for Jacqui to testify. This was actually the first time Reggie had ever seen her, and he cried as she took the witness stand. After a few weeks long trial, it was later that month, on Reggie's 20th birthday, when the jury found him guilty of 2 counts of intoxication manslaughter for taking the lives of Laura and Natalia. And with this, he faced up to 40 years in prison. He took to the witness stand asking the jury for probation, letting them know that he wanted to educate teenagers about drunk driving and, quote, give them something to think about.
Not too long ago, I was in high school, and I was out there, I was making the same decisions that most of you were making. I was going out there on the weekends, and I'd hang out with my friends, and I'd drink. We'd drink. It was the thing to do. But you see, one of the bad decisions that I made was getting behind the wheel to go home. And you could very easily make that same decision. You might have made it before. But I want to let you know you have a choice. There are a number of things you can do. First of all, if you don't drink, you can't be impaired. But you can probably call one of your friends that hasn't been drinking. Or maybe get a designated driver in the first place so you don't have to wait till the last minute. Or you can even call your parents. And you might have to suffer a little consequence for it, but I'm sure they'd be much happier having you home alive than in a body bag or behind bars. So I can get up here and I can tell you not to drink. I can tell you not to drink and drive. But in the end, the decision is going to be yours. And you have to make that choice. And so I hope you make the right decision and not the same decision that I did.
He further apologized to the victims and proposed that he could meet with them to speak with and apologize face-to-face in person. Jacqui seeing Reggie in court was also the first time she'd ever seen him. This was something she'd always been curious about, as she wanted to know what he looked like and what kind of person he was. When walking back to her seat from the witness stand, she took a peek at him and actually thought he was handsome. And though she felt sorry for him as she worried he wouldn't be able to attend college, she still felt he needed to take responsibility for what he had done and for the lives he had destroyed. With her saying afterward, quote, I wish there was something between guilt and innocence. While jurors discussed the punishment Reggie should face, Jacqui, along with the others, agreed to head to a conference room to meet him. At the end of this meeting with him, Jacqui told Reggie that she had no hate towards him, but that he needs to understand the gravity of what he had caused. And ultimately, she told him that she forgave him. Reggie said that he wished he could give the past back to her and told her that he's at her service and will do anything he can to help her, which according to the article, Jacqui replied by saying, quote, well, I do need a housekeeper. Johan shook Reggie's hand. Both Amadeo and Mauricio embraced him, and Reggie had even given Mauricio the crucifix he had been rubbing throughout the trial. He finally gave Jacqui a hug, which Jacqui recalled was a gentle one, saying she thinks he thought she would break if given one at a stronger force. Ultimately, the jury decided to sentence Reggie to 7 years in prison and fine him $10,000 for each death, which totaled $20,000. This also left Reggie eligible for parole 4 years later in 2005. This parole was ultimately denied, and Reggie was set for release from prison in 2008.
It was a very hard decision for the jury to make a decision on giving him 7 years. This was a horrible, horrible, horrible crash, one of the worst that I've ever seen.
In addition to all of the injuries Jacqui faced, Joanna had suffered dislocated bones, a fractured nose, and 2 lost teeth, whereas Johan suffered torn tendons in his knee and hand. So with this, Reggie was still facing assault charges for the 3 survivors. After they left the courtroom, Jacqui was surrounded by reporters for a news conference, and she told them, quote, even if it means sitting here in front of a camera with no ears, no nose, no eyebrows, no hair, I'll do this 1,000 times if it will help someone make a wise decision. I also think some of us who are strong have to go through things that help us make choices for those who are weaker. Before Jacqui headed back to Galveston, she had actually arranged a meeting with the paramedics and firefighters who rescued her, the paramedics being Brian Fitzpatrick and John McIntosh. They had testified before she arrived at the court, and so she wanted to thank them and also hear their side of the story of what happened. Both John, the one who stayed by the burning car window, and Brian, the one who discovered Jacqui was alive afterwards, were very shaken by the incident. Just the day after the crash, Brian was second-guessing himself while putting away his fire protection coat, questioning why he didn't throw it over her or why he didn't spit on the fire. Just stuff like that. There were also many nights that went by where Brian's wife would hear him moaning during nightmares he had, where the incident would replay over and over again in his head. With John also, he too had dreams. Particularly, there was one dream he had where he was looking down at a pry bar that was in his hands, like the one he used when he was trying to break open the burning door, and he kept calling the burn unit, asking about Jacqui before breaking an unwritten rule he had by driving down to Galveston to visit her. He attested that Jacqui was the strongest person he had ever met. They were going to be meeting at a hotel restaurant, and when the two paramedics saw her, they were amazed by the progress she had made. Because of his shaved head, Jacqui nicknamed John Kojak, referencing Lieutenant Theo Kojak, who was played by bald actor Telly Savalas in the Kojak TV series. And very soon, she started asking away her questions. She felt a lot of emotions when she discovered that she actually wasn't on fire when they first arrived on scene, because she was confused why they wouldn't have just pulled her out. But after they explained they couldn't move the door, and after she truly thought about the fact that she wouldn't have even survived if it weren't for them, she began to feel a bit more calm. She thanked the paramedics, joked around with them, and took pictures before hugging goodbye. She called the both of them her angels of salvation and rubbed John's bald head before leaving. While they were on their way back to Galveston, Reggie was on his way to prison, and Jacqui and Amadeo were right back on with their routine. They lived together in a second-floor apartment 4 blocks from the University of Texas's medical branch burn unit, and when they weren't going to massages, therapies, and doctor's appointments, they spent time shopping and eating fast food. Jacqui would spend most of her free time inside watching Latin American soap operas, emailing family and friends back home, and waiting for the next surgery. Also that month, in June of 2001, Jacqui's mother, Rosalia, had come down to Galveston to visit her for a month. In Jacqui's bedroom, she had a shrine of saints and Virgin Mary statues, and in the living room, she had framed pictures of how she used to look. She brought these photographs and saints wherever she went, and her father did as well. Jacqui described that, in general, she was very bored, and she was doing this all the while struggling with clinical depression. As part of their routine, Amadeo would stretch out Jacqui's body, and while this was really painful, she was slowly making more and more progress with her flexibility. They particularly wanted to work on her elbow, wrist, and hand area, considering her arm had lost muscle and nerve and was withered, and her finger stubs in her right hand had fully fused together. To try flexing her finger stubs, he would twist and stretch her wrist, and while the improvements for this were relatively small, Amadeo reasoned it stretched out about 1 millimeter per month, so if you just look at it 6 months later, that's already 6 millimeters. Jacqui had worries that she was relying too much on her father. She tried her best to do things independently if possible, but for a while, for things like showering, using the bathroom, eating, or dressing, she needed help. She didn't want to fail at what she tried, as this could have made her fall into depression, and she also worried that if she were to succeed, she would run out of goals. But nonetheless, she put her fears aside and still tried, working hard to find ways to work around doing things, whether it be wrapping a sponge around her forearm to wash herself, using her palms to hold her toothbrush, typing with her palm, or using her hands and teeth to button up her shirt, despite it taking 30 minutes to get one button through. Since her feet faced essentially no damage in the crash, she learned how to use her feet for things she would use her hands for. For example, she would stroke a soft blanket with her feet, and she would use her feet to test the temperature of shower water. As for nerve damage, there were some parts of her body that were left numb. Her left hand felt only pinpricks, described, quote, like 1,000 needles, and the bottom of her right palm was only able to make out some texture. But her hands hurt on a daily basis, and she didn't take painkillers for them. She just got used to it. She still liked to have physical touch, so if meeting someone, since she couldn't shake their hand, she would clasp strangers' hands with her palms, and she assured her friends that they could still give her tight hugs. Amadeo had always been a problem solver, but navigating this was a thing filled with a lot of uncertainty. While he did want to take care of his daughter, he wasn't sure if he'd ever be able to work again, which left him feeling very worried. They were left to live off of his savings, his investments, and money sent from his brothers at his company Climar. With him being away, the staff at Climar had shrunk significantly, the business stagnated, and the factory was actually losing money. He even had to sell Jacqui's car to save on expenses. Further, Jacqui had no health insurance and had to owe the University of Texas Medical Branch, or UTMB, about $1.3 million US. Now, the hospital was administered by the state of Texas, and they agreed to cut her bill to $450,000. But even then, by the summer of 2001, Amadeo estimated that he spent almost $500,000 US just on living, traveling expenses, therapies, and other medical care by that time. After the crash, the Saburido family sued Reggie Stephey for causing the crash. But not just this, because Jacqui also filed a lawsuit against General Motors, which is the company that made the Oldsmobile driven by Natalia. In this suit, her lawyer, Craig Seco of Corpus Christi, Texas, claimed that a flaw in the fuel line design caused the fire, and that had the fuel line been properly protected, Jacqui would have only faced broken bones and not all of those burns. Both of these lawsuits were settled sometime in 2001 for an undisclosed amount. General Motors declined discussing the suit, and they were never able to resolve the cause of the fire in court. But even still, her lawyer, Craig Seco, said he didn't think the settlements would be enough to cover Jacqui's future expenses. In fact, he hired an expert who said they would likely get up to needing $9 million US, an estimate that includes the over 120 operations Jacqui would go on to get over time, and even the cost of a caretaker, the role Amadeo was filling at the time. Because if he were to get much older or even pass away, they would need someone to take that role. And ultimately, later on, her bills did end up approaching $10 million US. Amadeo brought Jacqui to several different cities to see different doctors and get referrals and opinions, especially for different areas of her body that needed reconstructive work. Particularly, they were working hard to try salvaging her hands and eyes and help her be independent again. For a while, as doctors around the world were in a race to perform the world's first full-face transplant, Jacqui was actually a candidate to receive this. And while she was excited for this to be a possibility, ultimately, she decided against it due to the side effects of the anti-rejection drugs she'd have to take for the rest of her life, the increased risk of arthritis and cancer, and most importantly, because of her concern of not being able to have children, which is a dream she still held for herself. Later on, it eventually also got to a point where she got tired of just looking for doctors to try fixing something aesthetically just for her to essentially end up looking the same. Early in 2001, Jacqui had gone to Louisville, Kentucky for a hand operation to separate the stubs in her right hand. This was performed by a reconstructive surgeon and hand specialist who was born in the Dominican Republic named Dr. Louise Schecker. And after living in Galveston for 2 years, Amadeo and Jacqui began discussing possibly moving to Louisville so that they could be close to Dr. Schecker and his colleague who was an eye specialist. Jacqui had been told about Dr. Schecker by her cousin. One day after this, she decided to cold call him to inquire about his services, and he told her she should come to Louisville so he could take a look and she could see what he and his treatment plan was like. Dr. Schecker spoke Spanish, and after working on her right hand, he seemed attached to Jacqui's case, so they trusted him. His bedside manner was hands-on. He had a relaxed, cheerful energy, which they liked, and he was set to operate on her eyelid in August of 2001. So they wanted to figure out soon if they should move or not. This was a hard decision for Jacqui because she was comfortable in Galveston. She had friends and therapists there, and when she went to Kentucky that one time for her hand operation, she felt extremely isolated and depressed to the point her psychologist doubled her dose of Zoloft, an antidepressant. It took her 2 weeks to come to a conclusion, but ultimately Jacqui decided to move. I'm not sure when they did this, but at some point while in Galveston, they had flown in a housekeeper from Venezuela named Angelica Castro, who worked with them in Galveston and moved to Louisville with them. After leaving early in the morning one day at 6:10 a.m. for their trip down to Louisville, at Jacqui's request, they spent a night in Memphis, Tennessee, so that they could visit Graceland, which was Elvis Presley's old mansion, as she reasoned that they would probably never be driving by there again. When they got inside the next day, her father described the things Jacqui couldn't see. He wasn't a fan of Elvis, but he liked the place, and Jackie described that it was sad that he had passed away so young at 42 years old. After 2 days spent on the road and a nearly 1,000-mile drive, they arrived at their Louisville apartment. It was on the second floor of an apartment complex located in a leafy suburb about a 15-minute drive east of downtown. She thought that the place looked much better than Galveston. When their new car, a Honda Odyssey minivan, arrived, Jackie wanted to try parking it, but she had a hard time seeing the space as it was raining, and she struggled turning the wheels with her palms. She ultimately needed help to park it, and just adding to that, when she got out of the car, she slipped on wet grass, which nearly caused her to fall into a bush. She later on cried when thinking about all the things she was no longer able to do, and her dad consoled her. At some point, Jackie had her next appointment with Dr. Shecker, and after that appointment, Dr. Shecker and a reconstructive surgeon began planning on how they would rebuild her left eyelid. There were two things Jackie didn't want to happen. She didn't want her face to have any more scars added to them, and she didn't want them to take tissues from her feet, despite it being a relatively good spot, because her feet were the only parts of her body that still had full sensation. Finally, when the doctors figured out a plan, Dr. Shecker met with Jackie to tell her the options. The problem with the options, though, is that they all essentially involved the use of her feet. One of the options in particular involved them cutting tissue and a blood vessel from her foot to cover her eye with it. But as Dr. Shecker left the room to allow Jacqui and Amadeo to discuss, she was conflicted because she really didn't want to mess with her feet. When Dr. Shecker came back to the room, he told Jackie that he does care about her a lot, but she set the bar very high regarding the possibilities they could do for her. Ultimately, though, they ended up postponing the operation for a later date so that Jackie could have more time to think. Now, before this appointment ended, however, Dr. Shecker examined Jackie's left arm, only to find that a nerve must have been blocked because there was very little sensation in her arm and she wasn't able to bend her fingers. This was now added to another thing they needed to operate on, and they planned for this operation to take place during the morning of Friday, August 24th, 2001. One of the other possibilities they had discussed for her hands was to cut off her toes and attach them to her hands like fingers, but she wasn't ready for a sacrifice like that and thought maybe she could do that in a few years instead. On that Friday morning of August 24th, 7 doctors and nurses worked together to complete the operation on her left arm. Typically, one's muscles should be pink in color, but after making an incision and making small cuts into her white scar tissue, Jackie's muscles around her elbow looked pale. But just adding to this, as Dr. Shecker looked for the part in front of the nerve that was blocked, he ended up finding out that there was actually no blockage, and instead, the nerve just wasn't there at all. 5 centimeters of the nerve was missing, and it was all replaced by scar tissue, which wasn't good. It was after this when Dr. Shecker took off his surgery gear and headed into the hallway to speak with Amadeo. He explained to Amadeo that there was a piece of Jackie's nerve missing, and that the only possible way to replace the nerve was to replace it with a nerve. However, this nerve they had to use to replace it likely had to come from her foot. Dr. Shecker then followed up by asking if Amadeo wanted to make the decision of if they should do that right then and there. But Amadeo told him that he wanted Jackie to decide. With this, Dr. Shecker said they'll forget about the nerve for now, and instead they worked on widening the space between the webs in her hand to lengthen her left fingers. This surgery required making incisions in the hand webs and then covering the wounds with the skin from Jackie's side, a procedure that ended up taking about 2 hours. The incisions Dr. Shecker made were only 2 centimeters wide and 2 centimeters deep, as that was as far as they could go. But nonetheless, he hoped the cuts would leave more space for her fingers to maneuver around. This was great progress, and 2 days after the operation, Amadeo gave Jackie a bouquet of yellow roses. On Wednesday, September 19, 2001, Jackie and Amadeo celebrated her 2-year anniversary of the crash. Amadeo sang happy birthday to her as Jackie described how she just turned 2 years old. While she still questioned why this all happened and tried figuring out the meaning of life, Jackie's life had been starting to improve, and she was still able to celebrate the small victories she had throughout the year, despite the setbacks and how slow things seemed to be moving. For example, in the months before the crash's 2nd anniversary, Jackie was able to vacuum their apartment. Likewise, at some point, she was able to squeeze the eye drops into her eye by herself. Further, she was able to flip through her first magazine in 2 years, and through new glasses, she was even able to watch her first movie, Planet of the Apes. She still really wanted to be more independent, and one thing she particularly wanted to be able to do was drive. Amadeo let her practice parking, but she continued struggling with this. But she kept trying, and after 2 years of being unsuccessful, Jacqui was again able to drive. For more than 2 years, Jacqui's left eye was just floating freely in the socket. But after those 2 years of many attempts and failures, in March of 2002, an eye surgeon was able to successfully cover Jacqui's eye with a flap of skin. And this was done without having to use skin from her feet. With this, she and her father no longer had to put in the eye drops as frequently. She didn't have to sleep with a mask during the night. And instead of wearing the pressure suit on her full body, she only had to wear it from waist down. Because of this, she said she now slept like a queen. After this, in 6 months, doctors planned to cut a slit so she could see through the flap and potentially blink. Jacqui hoped that in the future she'd have surgeries done on her cornea to restore her vision. She further had more surgeries planned on her right hand's finger stubs, and she hoped to one day be able to get reconstructive surgery on her face. By late March of 2002, she was able to write emails quickly by herself by typing on a keyboard with a pen, and she was able to read without using a magnifying glass. She also began going back to classes for the first time since the crash. She and her cousin Yeli, who came down from Venezuela, began an intensive English program at the University of Louisville. Her dad would sit with her in the class, turning pages of her book and taking notes for her when she wasn't able to read the blackboard. In true Jacqui fashion, she scored a 100 on a midterm exam. In Caracas, Amadeo's company continued to struggle, especially through the political turmoil in the country at the time. That month, though, in March, he left Jacqui alone with Yeli for almost 2 weeks so he could visit his new girlfriend in Guatemala. This was his first vacation since the crash happened, and he actually met his girlfriend through Jacqui, as her son was a patient in the burn unit while Jacqui visited. Sometime around at the end of 2001, beginning of 2002, the Austin Police Department film crew asked if they could interview Jacqui so they could feature her in an anti-drunken driving video. And when she agreed, they flew to Louisville, where they interviewed and filmed her the next day in her living room. She felt obligated to make the video and wanted to repay people for helping her and showing there was a purpose for her survival. During her interview, she said drunk drivers affect everyone who knows about the incident, not just the victim. And she said, quote, "Look at me and then ask yourself, is it good to drink?" She spoke about her love for her old life, but said how now, quote, "My soul feels trapped, like my soul is strong and wants to get out." Further describing that this was her life, so she tries to enjoy it. And when the interviewer asked her where she gets her strength from, she said she gets it from love. She wasn't the only one featured in this video. They also featured Reggie Stephey. He stated that he was sorry and wasn't able to express how he felt about the damage he caused, saying, quote, "It's a pain that will never go away. It's never going to go away, no matter what I do." The day before they filmed, when the crew arrived in Louisville, Jacqui also asked Reggie what his days were like, if he was alone in a cell, and if he was sad. This video by the Austin Police Department wasn't the only video they featured in, because Jacqui and Reggie also were both interviewed and filmed by the Texas Department of Transportation for their Faces of Drunk Driving campaign. This was actually a 3-part campaign, with each part featuring interviews of Jacqui and Reggie in 2002, 3 years after the crash, 2004, 5 years after the crash, and 2009, 10 years after it. In the first part in 2002, Jacqui discussed the following.
My life before was completely different from that of today's. I was independent, 100% independent. I depended on my father financially, but I could do most things on my own, almost everything. What happens now is that I am a bit more afraid because I don't trust myself. Not because I'm a different Jacqui internally. It's rather that externally, I can't do what I could do before. Something I have always dreamed about but never thought of fulfilling was to be a singer. But of course, there's no way I could be a singer now, because singing nowadays requires many physical qualities, which I regrettably no longer have. One doesn't know what's worse, if to die or be left in this condition. There are times that I wonder, why was I left like this? Why didn't I die? Why did I remain here?
The person that caused my accident destroyed my life completely.
In the second part from 2004, Jacqui described the public perceptions people had of her.
Sometimes the hardest thing for me to do in my life is fight with the depression, fight when I go out, and sometimes people look at me like an alien or, something like that. My second life, I could say, is completely different, completely. Of the 24 hours of the day, probably, I can say 1 or 2 hours. I'm pretty sad about my appearance because I can say in those 2 hours things that I couldn't do it with my hands, or when I get so warm inside my body because I can't sweat, or when I sit on the mirror, I get so sad.
People would always stare at Jacqui, including children. Some would even shout. They'd ask their parents what happened. They'd follow her. Some would hide from her, and some would even cry. One time in a supermarket, after a boy saw Jacqui, he approached his mother and said, "Monster." She understood why the stares at her were happening because she knew they were curious, and oftentimes she was curious herself. She had a completely different face from what she had before, and it took time to get used to it, but it still wasn't easy. She would often spend days at home, just lying in bed and daydreaming about her past life in the last hours she had in Austin. And she constantly would question why this would happen to her and if she would ever be independent or, quote, normal again. But she would just remind herself daily that she could either spend the day lying in bed or keep going, saying, quote, "You choose." Her father, Amadeo, was also extremely supportive and was always there to encourage her, as she described, quote, "He's an angel with me." In Reggie's parts, he truly just reflects on how avoidable a situation this all was and warns people against making the decision he did when there were so many other choices he could have made that night.
I went from a football field on Friday to a prison cell on Sunday. That quick, through the choices I made on one Saturday. And so it can happen. I had never been in any trouble before in my life. I had never gotten any DWIs or gotten in trouble with alcohol at all. But the one time that I made that horrible decision, and the one time that I got in trouble, one time, it was devastating. And the fact that drinking and driving isn't a joke, it's not something to play around with. It's real, and these are the consequences. Depression can come up real quick when you realize all the things that are going on around your family and that you're missing. Knowing what's happened, knowing the damage that I've caused to so many people and so many families, it's something that I can't describe to anybody. And the prison sentence is nothing compared to the life sentence that I'm going to live with, knowing what I did and the consequences of what I did. The loss of life. It didn't have to happen.
I hear a lot from my friends and what they're doing and where they've been and what's happening to them at college, and part of me misses that. Seeing everything that's changing and everybody else moving forward, and here I'm just kind of spinning my wheels in the same place, doing the same things every day. And everybody else is moving forward. It's a hard thing to deal with sometimes. You see everybody and everything changing around you, and there's really nothing you can do to stop it or to move along with them. If you think ahead to what you're going to be doing, you can make the right decision.
According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, quote, every day about 34 people in the United States die in drunk driving crashes. This is the equivalent to 1 person every 42 minutes. In 2023 alone, 12,429 people died in alcohol-impaired driving traffic deaths. And all of these deaths were preventable had they called a cab, had they had a designated driver who wasn't going to drink, had they taken public transportation. There's so many things that could be done to prevent alcohol-impaired driving. Jacqui went on to raise awareness, speaking with high school and college students and many other people on different platforms as a motivational speaker. On November 25th, 2003, she featured in an episode of The Oprah Winfrey Show. Oprah described Jacqui as one of her most unforgettable guests, and she also featured again on the show 4 years later in 2007. It was while she was on the Oprah Show when she actually met with Reggie's mother, Jacqueline Stephey.
Prison and his mother, Jacqueline Stephey, is here. She has never met Jacqui. Jean, come on up. How are you? How are you? This is Jacqui. Yes. What do you want to say to her? You just saw this story. You obviously are familiar with this story.
In the instant that your life changed, our lives changed. You've been... Thought I could do this.
You can do it. You can do it.
Beautiful.
Oh, it's okay. Don't worry about it. You can do it. You can do it.
I have prayed for you and your father every minute since this happened, as my son has. All that you've gone through, we can only feel in our hearts. But I've kept track of everything that's going on with you. I've thanked God for your sight, and I pray every day for those miracles that will restore your life. But most of all, I pray that He keeps the joy in your heart because you are the most beautiful person, and I think He needs you and your strength and courage to be an example to all our precious young children that in an instant, life changes in an instant. And we have to be responsible and cautious and thoughtful of that all the time.
She became the face for the Faces of Drunk Driving campaign created by the Texas Department of Transportation. She was featured in a public service announcement, or PSA, that aired on TV, urging people to not drink and drive.
My name is Jacqueline Saburido. This is a picture of me before I was hit by a drunk driver. Before the car caught fire. Before 2 of my friends died. Before I needed more than 40 operations. This is me when my life was just like anyone else in college. This is me after being hit by a drunk driver.
One of the most notable, impactful slogans from the campaigns she was featured in was, quote, "Not everyone who gets hit by a drunk driver dies." Overall, not only did Jacqui share her own story, but many others have used her story in campaigns, whether it be teachers showing their students or students themselves creating their own presentation to teach others about the dangers of drunk driving. And this was shared by people all around the world. According to the 10-year update filmed by the Texas Department of Transportation for the Faces of Drunk Driving campaign, at 30 years old in 2009, Jacqui was back living in Caracas, Venezuela with her father. And in the video, she shared how she was doing at the time, a whole decade after the crash, which unfortunately revealed the many difficulties she still was faced with.
Almost 10 years after the accident, I see better. I can do things better with my hands, but I have to take care of my skin. I still have low vision, and I think I never will have what I want to have or what I have before. Right now I'm a little bit pessimistic and confused, so I'm 30. So I don't know exactly what I'm going to do. It has been so hard all of this time, and right now I'm trying to to concentrate, to accept what happened, and my life is going to be like this. So I don't know. It has been so difficult.
Jacqui particularly was having a very difficult time during this, as her mother, Rosalia, had just recently passed away 3 years prior in 2006 due to cancer. Despite being broken up, her mother spent her last living months in the home Jacqui shared with her father in Caracas. And her passing left Jacqui extremely depressed to the point of her isolating herself from her loved ones and even struggling to get out of bed some days. She stated, quote, "Every day was worse. I didn't want to get out of bed. I argued with my dad, with other people. It wasn't life." After a while of Jacqui feeling this way, it got to a point where her family urged her to seek help. Her father's girlfriend had even mentioned an intensive therapy program that was in Florida. And it was earlier that year in 2009 when Jacqui and her father flew to South Florida, where Jacqui checked into a 3-month program that provided intensive counseling, group therapy, and meditation at a small cottage the hospital owned that was essentially closed off from the rest of the outside world. This helped her look forward and feel more hopeful than she had in years, with goals of starting an anti-drunk driving campaign in Venezuela. And it even helped with her making a huge milestone of traveling on a plane by herself for the first time since the crash when she headed to San Antonio to film the 10-year update on Friday, August 14th, 2009. By this point, Reggie himself had been released from prison the previous year, and he also reflected on the whole situation.
20 years old when I was sentenced to prison, and I was 27 years old when I got out. It's not what you see on TV, but it's not a place anybody wants to go. I would have much rather gone to college out of high school than gone to prison. Basically, I'm at a 10-year setback in terms of all of the stages of life that one usually goes through. You can let it get you down and quit, or just keep taking one step at a time. It'll still be a long road. The accident will always be a part of my life. It's not something I could change, but it's also not something I'm able to describe to anybody else. It's not something that'll ever go away. It can be forgiven, but it can't be forgotten.
While in prison, Reggie got his associate's degree in philosophy and business, and once released, he enrolled at the University of Texas while also working construction jobs on the side. He continued to carry the weight of his actions, but also tried moving forward, stating, quote, "It's defined a large part of my life, but it doesn't define who I am." Jacqui and Reggie actually met up at a hotel on the day of their interviews, where they spoke for over an hour, and they also took a photo together. On Friday, August 14, 2009, Jacqui also spoke at the Texas Department of Transportation's annual Save a Life Summit in San Antonio, Texas.
It's not been so easy to live like this, even though I have my soul, and my soul is like a trap or inside, that cannot get out. And it's pretty difficult because I wanna to be like any girl of my age, and it's not possible. Sometimes I compare with some girls. I say I wanted to get married, to have children, and to do the regular life, a normal life. But in my case, I don't know. I don't want to depend of another people, but in some way I have to accept that I have to depend. And this did a drunk driver. So I think it's pretty important to keep doing this, to continue telling people don't drink and drive. It is so important.
Unfortunately, after several years of health battles, Jacqui was diagnosed with cancer. And it was on Saturday, April 20th, 2019, when Jacqueline Saburido passed away at 40 years old. This happening 13 years after her mother had also passed away from cancer in 2006. According to her obituary, Jacqui had moved to Guatemala a few years prior, seeking better treatment for her illness. She passed away in Guatemala City, but was brought back home to be buried in Caracas. In her time, she has touched many lives and still continues to do so. Many people still cite her story to educate others on the dangers of drunk driving, and I hope her story will continue to not only make people think twice before getting behind the wheel while intoxicated, but also show others the power of persevering and working on your mindset. Because no matter how miserable Jacqui described often being, she intentionally made an effort to not ponder on what had happened to her, but think about what she could do now to find light in the actual moment. And her mindset was just something I truly admired while researching her story. And just also shout out to her loved ones, especially her father, seeing how he dropped everything to make sure he took that role of caring for her for the rest of her life was very inspiring. Regardless of unconditionally loving someone, especially your child, caretaking is not something that's easy to do. And I really just want to give Amadeo his flowers for truly being there for Jacqui every step of the way. Also, while their stories aren't really publicly available online, both Johan and Joanna, the other two survivors, also experienced this very tragic incident, and I hope they are doing well today. And rest in peace to both Natalia and Laura, who lost their lives in the crash. But yes, that is it for today's video. What are your thoughts on this case? Was there anything in particular that stood out to you about Jacqui's story? What are your thoughts on the sentencing? What are your thoughts on the medical bills? Was Jacqui's mindset inspiring to you? Was her family, especially her father's support, inspiring? Please comment your thoughts below and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any other videos on medical cases, crime, and mysteries. Bye now.